name is Scott Nicholson, and I'm an organizer for the Montana Human Rights Network and a member of Community Action for Justice in the Americas, or CAJA. Our program this evening is about the growing movement to close the U.S. Military School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. With me today are 5 Missoulians who traveled to Georgia in mid-November to participate in the annual demonstration calling for the closing of the school. And we'll start by having each of our friends introduce themselves. Gail, you want to start?
There's only 4 of us, but that's okay. Hi, I'm Gail Gilman, and I live in Missoula. I'm a mother and a nurse, and I belong to the CAJA and also to Missoula Advocates for Human Rights and to Indian Peoples Action. And this November I traveled to Fort Benning as part of the School of America protest. This was my 4th year to go.
My name is Rita Jankowski Bradley, and I'm a coordinator for the Jubilee Missoula Network, which is part of the Jubilee USA Network, working on cancellation of debt for poor countries. I'm also a member of Community Action for Justice in the Americas and the Missoula Women for Peace. And the Missoula Women for Peace are part of the a broader peace network, statewide peace network, who've been working on peace and justice issues. The person that's not here tonight to be with us is, well, there are 3 people that went to the School of Americas besides us. One, a musician, Amy Martin, and Katie Crowley, who is a student who's now on her way to Columbia, and then our son, my son, Egan Jankowski Bradley.
Good evening, my name is Cliff Bradley. I've worked a long time in Latin America and agriculture, and I've been interested in issues of social justice in Latin America. In Missoula, I'm a member of CAJA, the Community Action for Justice in the Americas, and I also do some work with the Maryknoll affiliates. Went to the School of America's protest this year for the first time.
Hi, my name is Janina Bradley, and I'm a University of Montana student. I'm studying sociology and environmental studies. I'm also a member of Community Action for Justice in the Americas.
On the day that the United States began bombing Afghanistan, President Bush said, quote, "If any government sponsors the outlaws and killers of innocents, they have become outlaws and murderers themselves, and they will take that lonely path at their own peril." While our military is fighting what we're told is a war on terrorism in Afghanistan, the military continues to operate a terrorist training camp here in our own backyard, the School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. The School of the Americas, or SOA, was founded in 1946 in Panama and transferred to Fort Benning, Georgia in 1984. The school has trained more than 60,000 Latin American soldiers. The school focuses on counterinsurgency training with courses in commando tactics, military intelligence, psychological operations, and combat training. Graduates of the SOA have been involved in some of the worst human rights abuses in Latin America. In El Salvador, Roberto Dobusan, the founder of the Death Squads, was an SOA graduate. It was also Dobusan who ordered the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero in March of 1980. On December 2nd of 1980, SOA graduates planned and participated in the rape and murder of U.S. churchwomen Ida Ford, Maura Clark, Dorothy Kozel, and Jean Donovan. On December 10th, 1981, International Human Rights Day, SOA graduates participated in the massacre of more than 900 peasants at El Mozote. And on November 16th of 1989, the 6 Jesuit priests that ran the Central America University in San Salvador, their housekeeper and her daughter, were killed by the military. 19 of the 26 soldiers that took part in those killings had been trained at the School of the Americas, including some who had just returned from taking the commando operations course at the school. The annual demonstrations at Fort Benning began in November of 1990 on the first anniversary of the murder of the Jesuits, their housekeeper, and her daughter. And the demonstrations have continued every year on the weekend closest to that anniversary. In Guatemala, School of the Americas graduate General Rios Montt took power through a coup and ruled during the height of the counterinsurgency campaign. 40% of the cabinet ministers who served the military dictatorships of Lucas Garcia, Rios Montt, and Mejia Victores studied at the School of the Americas. And that counterinsurgency campaign destroyed more than 440 Mayan villages and led to the death or disappearance of more than 200,000 people. More than 10,000 Colombian soldiers have trained at the School of the Americas, and SOA graduates are involved with the paramilitary groups that are responsible for more than 3/4 of all human rights violations currently being committed in the country. This type of track record for its alumni has created a public relations problem for the school and has resulted in growing opposition in Congress. In May of 2000, an amendment to close the School of the Americas lost in the House by just 10 votes. In January of last year, the military changed the name of the school. It's now called the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. However, the school continues to operate as a counterinsurgency combat training school for Latin American soldiers. A bill has been introduced in Congress to close the school, and that bill now has 94 co-sponsors. The bill number is H.R. 1810. Just before last November's demonstration at Fort Benning, we delivered more than 100 letters to the office of Representative Denny Rehberg, urging him to become a co-sponsor of H.R. 1810. And we encourage you to also contact Representative Rehberg and request that he co-sponsor this bill. The number for his office here in Missoula is 543-9550, and the number for the DC switchboard at the Capitol is area code 202-225-3211. We're now going to watch an excellent video about the School of the Americas called Guns and Greed that was put together by the Mary Knoll Associates. And then we'll talk to our guests about why they decided to travel to Georgia in November and about the demonstrations that took place at Fort Benning.
November 1989, 6 Jesuit priests, their housekeeper, and her 15-year-old daughter were assassinated. Of the 26 men found responsible, 19 were graduates of SOA, the United States Army School of the Americas. SOA has trained over 60,000 soldiers from Latin America in commando tactics, psychological warfare, and military intelligence. March 1980. While celebrating Mass, Archbishop Oscar Romero was gunned down. SOA trained 2 of the 3 identified as his killers. December 1980. 4 church women from the United States were raped and murdered in El Salvador. Of the 5 found responsible, 3 were trained at SOA. December 1981. 900 men, women, and children, virtually the entire village and area surrounding El Mozote, were massacred.
There were soldiers on both sides. They killed all of them. Not a single one of them survived. Just me, by the grace of God. I hid under a tree. When I heard the screams of the children, and I knew which ones were mine, they were crying, "Mommy, they're killing us."
Out of 143 bodies identified in the laboratory, 130 were of children under the age of 10, including 3 infants under the age of 3 months. 10 of the 12 officers later found responsible were SOA graduates.
Death follows the school's graduates wherever they go.
In November 1999, 12,000 people from all over the United States gathered at the gates of Fort Benning, Georgia, where SOA is headquartered.
Like every day, another young person is deciding like they can't participate anymore in like the death machine.
It's really horrible.
They were there to demand that SOA be shut down.
But
a critical mass of people coming together to effect change, and we all feel that we'll accomplish something.
And what does this cross represent?
It's a human being that was killed by one of the graduates of the school. Tortured or killed.
How does that make you feel?
Beyond words.
I think the most important part of the march is that we're not here for ourselves, not here for our personal motives. We're here for others.
This robe and mask, they're a symbol of death. They're to memorialize all the victims of the graduates of the SOA.
And for the name of each victim, thousands respond, presente. I am here.
Ignacio Martin Barro.
Everyone back behind the line, please. Everyone behind the line.
Any protester crossing the Fort Benning boundary line can be jailed up to 6 months and fined $5,000.
Subject to fine and imprisonment.
Despite the risk, these ordinary Americans decided to cross the line.
I want my word to be heard, and the only way it's going to be heard is I defy. So I'm going to go across.
Well, they say that we should prepare for jail time. I don't anticipate that happening, but I'm ready for that.
I want to share with you my story. My father, Adrian, kidnapped and disappeared in 1981 by Guatemalan security forces. My daughter, Rosaura, who was 10 years old when Guatemalan security forces kidnapped and disappeared her. This is my daughter, Glenda, who was 9 years old at the moment of her disappearance, and my 18-month-old baby sister, kidnapped and disappeared by Guatemalan security forces.
In 1996, the Pentagon admitted that SOA manuals instructed students to use blackmail, torture, and execution.
My husband was tortured in Guatemala, and the people he was tortured by were trained here at the School of the Americas.
Bishop Juan Girardi, who headed an investigation of human rights in Guatemala, was assassinated in 1998, 2 days after his report was issued. A key suspect in jail is an SOA graduate. The bishop's report cited SOA graduates in Guatemala for many human rights abuses.
Ignacio Martin Barro.
I've heard the stories of people who were victimized by men who were trained here at the School of the Americas, and I come to the School of the Americas to bring their memory here to say to the people who run the school that it can't go on.
In Colombia, 250 military were cited for human rights atrocities, 1/2 of them SOA graduates. Following SOA counterinsurgency training, they kidnapped, murdered, massacred, and set up paramilitary death squads.
We're going as a family this year. The family that gets arrested together stays together. It is important that we teach our children some important values, and I want my children to know that sometimes to make changes in this country, it takes some risk. You got to take risks for the things you believe in, and I want them to learn that.
In Chiapas, unarmed indigenous people have stood up to the military occupying their land. Until uprisings like these began in 1994, very few Mexicans had been trained at SOA. But once the people stood their ground, the Mexican army sent thousands of their officers to SOA for special training. So far, 18 SOA graduates from Mexico have played key roles in warfare targeting civilians in Chiapas. In the 16th century, the conquistadors arrived in Latin America from Spain and Portugal. They exploited the people and the resources and became very wealthy. Today, the sweatshops, the World Bank, and IMF exploit Latin America's people and resources. They enrich corporations and government officials. They are the new conquistadors. These new conquistadors need the military, the men with the guns, to protect their wealth and power. That's where the School of the Americas comes in.
After they graduate, these newly trained military officials will go back to the Latin American countries, and they'll be used as union busters in the most extreme sense of the phrase. Thousands of unions throughout Latin America have disappeared, they've been tortured, and they've been murdered for trying to improve the conditions of their fellow workers.
If you think of the worst nightmare of the major corporations, it's that young people will start to ask serious questions about where this stuff is produced. Are their rights respected? And that's exactly what's happening across the country.
Women in Central American sweatshops produced much of the clothing worn in the United States, clothing made for U.S. corporations. Sweatshops use child labor, fire pregnant women, force workers to put in overtime at starvation wages. Women who try to organize unions meet harsh retaliation.
The School of the Americas currently trains the militaries that are repressing the unionization of the workers in these sweatshop factories. That repression will not end until the School of the Americas stops legitimizing that process.
As a union organizer from the Service Employees Union and a labor leader, I feel that it's necessary for us to help protect the rights of workers in Latin America. The schools specifically identified in their training manuals union organizers as subversives. Basically, what I do here in the United States in helping people organize unions, if I was doing that in Latin America, I could very well be killed for what I do to help people here.
There's no excuse for the continuation of the School of the Americas, used to enforce this cycle of oppression for the workers making our clothes.
This is being done in our name, by our government, in order to continue to further the high material standard of living, which we Americans enjoy, are told we enjoy it. And that's on the backs of many hidden costs. It has high environmental costs that we don't pay for. It has high social costs and high human costs. We're all part of that. We all live that lifestyle, and by being silent, that's a sin of omission.
People in this country don't want to hear that my lifestyle is really the cause of people in other parts of the world starving to death, that I have more than I have a right to. No one has a right to anything beyond their need when others lack the barest necessity. There are people that are just devastated by poverty in huge numbers, hundreds of millions of people. And so when the poor demand some of these things from us, they're demanding what belongs to them.
As a concerned citizen of conscience, I do hereby declare my intention to follow the Spirit wherever it may lead me this day, to help give a voice to the voiceless victims who continue to suffer even today.
As the many crimes by SOA graduates have come to light, a movement to shut down SOA began. The earliest actions were by a handful of people taking part in hunger strikes at the gate of Fort Benning, and in small groups protesting in Washington, D.C. By 1998, over 7,000 gathered at Fort Benning's gate. Over 2,000 protesters risked arrest by crossing the line.
Never before did we expect this number. We were hoping for 1,000. We got 2,319.
1999 brought new approaches to shut the school. Several thousand marched in front of the Pentagon. 60 of the protesters put their bodies on the line and were arrested. Reinforcing the public protests, others repeatedly lobbied their representatives and senators, asking them to stop spending taxpayer funds for the school.
Our position is that we want our senators out there fighting to get it on the floor.
Every vote in Congress to shut SOA has gotten closer to success. Among the thousands of World Bank IMF protesters in Washington were a group who link these financial giants with the School of the Americas.
I sort of consider it the military arm of the IMF and the World Bank. The structural adjustment programs that the IMF forces third world countries to endure in accepting loans have to be implemented by the governments of those countries. And with U.S. military aid and the United States School of Americas, that's the military arm that's allowing the economic policies of the World Bank and the IMF to be implemented in the countries that are accepting debts.
Structural adjustment is a way the World Bank and IMF force poor countries to repay loans by cutting back on human services like schools and health care, and raising the price of basic needs. When poor people are hurt by this, many protest. And the military, often led by SOA graduates, squelch these popular uprisings.
As we have put it on our banner, they're one big happy family, and without that repressive military, these programs that in fact ruin the environment, cause more poverty, move people into a spiral downward, are kept in place by this repressive military.
The list of SOA abuses is so long that 100 of the protesters took part in a risk-filled action, passive resistance to arrest, increasing the likelihood of prison time.
I don't know how one prepares for prison. I'm prepared in my soul, and that's where I had to discern this and know in my heart that this was right.
The high-risk group of 100 led the women, men, and children who crossed the line, over 4,000 altogether, taking part in the largest act of civil disobedience in the United States since the Vietnam War.
I believe in nonviolence in everyday life and in protests, so being part of this movement is sort of part of my life and very important to me for that reason. I wouldn't be involved in it if it weren't nonviolent.
Well, it's peaceful resistance, and we feel that what they're doing is wrong, and so we're showing them so, but non-violently.
This is a tribute to those who have already died, and we want to work to ensure that no more people in Latin America have to die as a result of the graduates of this school.
I'm a little scared because I believe the military has every power at their disposal.
Sir, I need you to get up, sir. Sir, I need you to get up, sir. Come on. Come on. I need you to get up, sir. I need you to get up. Let me give you a hand.
Those people in Central America, I mean, they put their lives on the line when they do something like this. I'm lucky enough to be in a place where I only risk jail time.
they will force the issue, they'll be in court, and the thing will be exposed before the American public.
More than 50 women and men in the SOA Watch movement have served a total of 30 years in prison for their nonviolent protests.
I think this is by far the largest crowd they've had, the most diversified crowd. Well, I think they've made their point. Then it'll be up to Congress now to decide what Congress wants to do.
It's a wonderful spiritual experience, really powerful. So it's been hot, my feet are tired, but I'm uplifted.
They just can't control us. There's so many of us, and we're all peaceful, ordinary, prayerful people. What do you do when you have so many ordinary Americans coming to this place of death and in such a peaceful, joyful spirit? They just have to let us go. But we'll keep coming back. If ordinary Americans knew what was happening here, that we're training death squads throughout Latin America, they'd be outraged. They wouldn't want it to happen, and they'd close it down. And that's what's happening. It's really historic. It's really a historic event here. It's like the Selma March. So we're all filled with hope.
That was an extremely powerful video. Now I'd like to start our conversation by asking each of you, why was that you decided to travel to Georgia in November? What was it that motivated you to take part in the demonstration at the School of the Americas? So who would like to start?
I'll go ahead. My awakening actually occurred several years ago. My church, which is the First United Methodist Church, sent me to Guatemala and El Salvador, and it was a 2-week journey into those countries, and we spent that time, a week in each country actually, meeting with various groups, all kinds of groups actually. They were groups of union organizers, they were religious groups, groups with women, indigenous peoples, and they met and showed us what they do as far as their crafts and so forth, which is really why I was sent there, to learn more about the indigenous communities and what they were doing with their work, their craft work, and how we could help sell those kinds of things up here, and just having a more personal touch to it by having someone from the church go down. But what I learned in that 2-week period of time was the complicity of our own federal government and the horror that's been so pervasive through these countries in Latin America, in all the wars that have occurred, the civil wars that have been ongoing there through these last 50 years have been struggles that have been in large part with School of America graduates being part of that and committing horrible atrocities against citizens from those countries. as we went through this 2-week period, I just became more and more overwhelmed by what I was hearing. And finally, in the last full day we were there in Guatemala City, we met in the U.S. Embassy in that city and spoke with an official there. And we listened to him, and then we had a question and answer period. And I can remember just being so upset after the 2 weeks that what I had heard at that time, that I just simply asked him, what is this about? How could my own country, how could my government be responsible for the kinds of things that I've learned about here? And he couldn't really answer that. Apparently I made him a little uncomfortable at that time, but that was okay too. And I came back, I remember flying back into this country and thinking, if there's anything, any single little thing I could do to help close down the school, then I wanted to do it. And I think when you have something like that become so important to you, a person becomes led to do those kinds of things. And it wasn't long before I was hearing how I could get involved, and that there was a group that was meeting at the gates of Fort Benning, where the School of America exists. And we had a speaker, Ashley in Missoula, at that time, and she came to Christ the King Church, and I went to that talk and learned more about it, saw a video, and ended up going down to the School of Americas, actually with several other people from Missoula at that time. Father Jim Hogan from Christ the King Church being one of those. And I did decide to cross the line, and that was the first year that people were not arrested for crossing the line. And I did that the next year also. And the third year, last year, we were finally arrested. They decided to start arresting people again because they weren't getting rid of us, I think, as they had hoped to do by not arresting us. They thought maybe we would go away if it wasn't such a big thing. They didn't make so much of it. Well, last year they arrested us, and there were quite a few hundred of us arrested and processed. And at that time we received 5-year ban and bar letters telling us that we would not be allowed on Fort Benning grounds for 5 years. And then this year, this November, I went again for the 4th time. And it was a whole different feeling this time. And maybe I should, we can talk about that a little later. I better let Rita go on here.
Okay, I guess what drew me to participating this year is, well, it's part of my personal journey to trying to understand what's happening in the world and to have to be more of a participant in actions rather than just always learning and thinking about it. I think that it's so important that we help give a voice to the voiceless by being someplace to question and challenge things that are wrong. The School of Americas is also known as the School of Assassins since I think it was 1984. The Panama newspaper called it that, the School of Assassins, when it was actually taken out of Panama and put into the United States in Fort Benning, Georgia. And when you know that your own country participates in training soldiers that go home to their own land and are able to be dehumanized during that training so they can kill their own people, they can kill women and children, healthcare workers. I'm a healthcare worker. And I realized that in those communities, I would be a target if I was trying to help women and children. Gail's a nurse, just so many of people that I know and things that in the fields we work in, that we would not be able to continue our work. So, or else we would risk being killed. And it's just such a terrible, terrible thing. And like at the School of Americas, where they say not in our name, they also say no mas, no more. And it's our tax dollars that's participating in this. And so it's really my money, and I really feel that it's wrong. And so this is one way I can say I don't want this to happen again. I guess also one thing that led me to wanting to participate is that this year we went on a study tour to Nicaragua, my daughter, my husband, and myself, on debt, trade, and aid. And we saw firsthand what happens with the structural adjustment policies. and how the poor suffer from the injustices so that other countries can, and other peoples, the rich can actually have more and more, and the poor have less and less. And then again, with Community Action for Justice in Americas, quite often I've been so lucky we've been able to use our home as a place for visitors from Latin America to stay, and just having them in our house in our presence and realizing that they face death threats every day. It is really, you know, it made me think I should go. And they say that it's so important that we in the United States do something. We say we have to speak out, and they thank us so much for that. And this year it was particularly powerful because Jesus Ariza from Landazuri, Colombia, our sister community, was here in Montana, staying at our home for a while, and then traveling around Montana. And he works on sustainable agriculture and illiteracy, and is just a worker within his community. And while he was here, his best friend and colleague was murdered for his similar work, and that was so powerful to know that was happening, and that Jesus' life was in danger. And so when his friend Reyes Diaz was murdered, I mean, that even strengthened more the fact that we do have to do something, and we have to put our voices together and protest.
Well, I mean, the whole family has been interested and involved in Latin American issues for many, many years, back even in the 1970s during the Nicaraguan revolution, and through the 80s during the time of the Contras and all that, and have followed these issues. This year it seemed like it was the time to go to the School of the Americas, primarily because they were telling us it was a bad time, that there was a message out that in the wake of the September 11th and the war on terrorism, that this was not the time to go to the School of Americas and do this protest. And people in the protest community felt otherwise, and really said this was the time, that this is, if we're going to have a war on terrorism, like Scott mentioned at the beginning of the program, then it needs to start at home with the #1 terrorist training school on earth, and we need to raise our voices to stop that. I mean, we're fighting a war on terrorism due to a tremendous tragedy in New York where more than 3,000 people were killed. Graduates of the School of the Americas are responsible for the displacement or killing of more than 2 million people in Latin America over 40 years, and it has got to stop. And so this year we all went to Fort Benning, Georgia. And I remember been involved, we've had good friends in Nicaragua for many, many years, and it's a country that we visited on this study tour that Rita mentioned, and I've been there several times previously, and I remember working with a man who became my good friend. In this country, his title would be an agricultural extension agent. That's what he did. He worked with cooperatives, and I first met him, I think, in 1992, shortly after the end of the Contra Wars, and he described to me being trapped in an all-night firefight in the mountains of Nicaragua because he was advising a cooperative of small coffee farmers on better ways to manage coffee. And he described hiding behind trees while being shot at by Contras, people who were trained, and a number of their leaders trained at the School of Americas to overthrow the government of Nicaragua because we didn't like their policies. And these people were just growing coffee, and one of the people he worked with was killed by the Contras, and he was just given a rifle to fight back. And this is a man who's an extension agent, and just that really stuck with me over these years, and there's no reason why our government has to support that.
I went to the School of Americas protest this year because I feel it's my responsibility, because the more people that go and participate, other people see, and they have to open their eyes, and they have to kind of look at the issue, and the more people that understand it, and then we can respond like we're supposed to in a democracy, and we can understand what's going on and respond as citizens to this country. And I don't want to belong to a country that promotes or participates in terrorizing human beings. And so I feel it is important to go because other people see, and before we left we had presentations and hundreds of people showed up, so it just continues the movement. It's important to get people educated and to get out there and be a voice.
And I, for my part, haven't had the opportunity yet to actually travel to the School of the Americas, but I have gone to El Salvador and seen where the graduates have carried out some of the atrocities there. And I'd certainly like to thank all of you for taking the time to go to Georgia in November. Would like to mention just briefly, I did have a chance to go to a protest about the School of the Americas in El Salvador myself in April of '98 in front of the U.S. Embassy, and people from northern El Salvador and throughout the country came down there to call for a closing of the School of the Americas. And these were people that had been on the receiving end of what the graduates have done there. My first trip to Central America was to the Mesa Grande refugee camp in Honduras in September of '89. There were about 10,000 refugees from El Salvador there at that point in time who had fled from the repression and the war in El Salvador, and about 500 of them were getting ready to go back to what is now Comunidad Ignacio Ellacuría. So I had a chance to visit them there in the camp. They went back, got back into El Salvador on October 29th of 1989, and a little over 2 weeks after that, on November 16th, is when Father Ellacuría, the other Jesuits, their housekeeper and her daughter, were killed by the Salvadoran military. And again, 19 out of the 26 soldiers that took part in those killings had been trained at the School of the Americas. The community, a few months after that, renamed themselves Comunidad Ignacio Ellacuría in honor of Father Ellacuría. My first trip to El Salvador was in March of '90, and we were there at the time of the 10th anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Romero. And when I was back in El Salvador about 6 years ago, I had a chance finally to go to the Hospital of Divine Providence where he had worked, and went to the chapel where he was assassinated. And I've also had the opportunity to go to the University of Central America and go to the Rose Garden that's been planted on the site where the Jesuits, their housekeeper, and her daughter were killed. So seeing those images in the video really brings back those memories of being in those places. And again, certainly for my part and on behalf of all the people in Comunidad Ellacuría and elsewhere in El Salvador, I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to go there in November. The next question I had, I know that the demonstration itself took place on November 18th, but there were some other activities prior to that. And I'd like to hear a little bit about what some of those other activities were like on the Friday and Saturday before the demonstration.
Well, one of the really interesting side activities that occurred this year at the protest was the legal actions before it even happened, that the military and the city government of Columbus, Georgia, where the town by the School of Americas, had decided that this was not the year to have any protests, that this would not be a good thing. And the city got an injunction, or was trying to get an injunction to prevent the march, and wanted to put the entire activities in a baseball stadium away from the gates of the school. And so the leaders of the march, Father Roy Bourgeois and other the Maryknoll and Jesuit priests who lead this effort, tried to negotiate with the city and the military to no avail, and finally went to court. I think that they were in court on Friday when the march was to happen on Sunday, and in a really perhaps amazing display of civil liberties, the court actually overturned the city's injunction and allowed the march to proceed, saying that this space had been taken by this protest this was the 11th year, and that this space belonged to the protest this week. It had been nonviolent for its 11 years, And this was a legitimate expression of American public opinion, and they couldn't stop it. And so that was the, up until Friday, after late Friday afternoon of this weekend, no one knew whether the march was even going to be allowed to proceed or not. So that was kind of the interesting prelude to the whole thing.
And I happen to have the article that says that, Judge, march on.
The interesting thing is this is Judge Faircloth, who has been very severe in punishing people who have crossed the line in past years. So for him to do this was very, very powerful. He felt he must uphold the First Amendment and our right to be there. And in fact, he's the one who sentenced the two Catholic sisters, one an 88-year-old sister and her sister, who was also a Catholic sister, who was 68, to 6 months in prison. And the interesting part of this story is that he said, you know, if we need to have the City of Georgia police available to protect the School of America's military base from all these nonviolent protesters, then we're in a lot of trouble. So that was kind of interesting, and it was a real victory for civil liberties as well as to protest the atrocities that occur at the School of Americas.
And there were some other activities that went on over the weekend, right? There was like a teach-in and a gathering on Saturday. So maybe explain a little bit about some of those activities.
There was a wonderful gathering on Saturday where people got together and there was songs and many speeches just to connect people to hear other people's struggles and how they've been affected by how their families have been killed by SOA graduates or disappeared. And so there was a lot of sadness, but it brought everybody together to see people's faces, and there was music, and I think it was really powerful for people to be able to just kind of hear the music and people's stories, and so kind of understand what was going on. And the next day the procession proceeded, and it was really powerful.
This was the first year too that this gathering had been held at the stadium. Up until this time, the Saturday gathering had taken place, as had the march, or the procession, the funeral procession actually, at the gates of Fort Benning. And having it at the stadium was not a bad thing. It was actually more comfortable. People could sit. I think it went very well. And something that really touched me about this year's event, for one thing, the people of Columbus, there seemed to be more rumors flying about our gathering, which was surprising because we've been there for 11 years now. But people were told to stay clear of us, and a lot of interesting things going on. People would talk to us in restaurants and ask us about it, and we would try to educate. So they did give us some opportunities there. But one of the things that occurred at the stadium, there was a pastor there, a Methodist pastor, who spoke at that time, and he was the first person, I guess, first citizen of Columbus who publicly stood up and welcomed us and said, you know, opened his heart and had goodwill towards us and just welcomed our presence there. And that was a very courageous thing for him to do, and several of us attended his services the next day. This is actually an interracial church, Methodist church, that is in Columbus, and one that we have attended every year that I've gone down there. But it was an act of courage on his part to be willing to put himself out there to greet us, and I don't think most people who were part of the gathering appreciated just what it cost for him to be able to do that kind of thing.
And so the main procession was on Sunday the 18th, and so what was that like? I'd like to hear a little bit just about that procession itself, and also kind of how you felt as you were taking part in that.
I think it's an amazingly powerful experience. I mean, just as you saw in the video, to be standing with 10,000 people and raising your cross in unison, it's unbelievable. And it made me wonder how, I mean, the people who run the School of Americas, the military, they know what goes on, what their training is. And for them to be able to ignore or just sort of blow off that kind of presence, I just can't comprehend how they can do that. I mean, it's just, after seeing that and being there, it's just unbelievable how powerful and moving that is.
And this year they built us a fence for us.
Special fence.
And people would walk up and put their crosses in the fence, and pictures of people, and pictures that are speeches by Romero. And at the end of the day, it was just this filled fence. It was, I don't know how far it was, but...
Transferred from a fence to keep us out to a memorial wall, really.
And there was doves, and it was beautiful, but all those crosses also represented people that had been killed by graduates, and so I think it made a very powerful statement, and I think it touched a lot of people, like the police officers and fire people from Columbus that were there. They commented on just this wall of crosses and the stories that it told.
No, for me, the funeral processional, it was very solemn and very sacred. But at the very beginning, when you went to get your crosses, I went to the boxes to gather some for my family and some of the other people from Montana that were with us. And I just pull out enough crosses for us, and I take them over to deliver them so each of us can have a cross. And in my box, everyone that I had said from El Salvador, and it was a child age 10, a child age 5, an infant, 3 months. There was not one cross where someone was older than 25. And it, as a mother, and just as another human being, it was just almost too much to bear doing that. But we did take the crosses. We took the crosses of the infants and carried them, which makes it very difficult when you're each time holding up a cross of this baby that has been murdered, and they haven't even had a life at all, and it's so unjust. So that was very, very difficult, but it was such a sacred, solemn processional, and beautiful, beautiful musicians and voices to sing each person's name in honor to say that they are still present with us and that we have not forgotten them and they have not died in vain. That was very, very powerful. And just to be with other people from our community and our state. There were 11 people from Montana this year and 2 young people that are now in Boston who had gone to the University of Montana that became part of our delegation. And meeting people that I had met who worked with the Nicaragua support network there, just having friends from all over the country. It was very, very powerful and profound experience. And I can see why Gail, says, has been there for 4 years, because it's once you go, it's just you feel like you should go again because it's so important to do that. It was just very touching.
I think I've been found out because everyone thought I was doing this great sacrifice by going to Fort Benning year after year, and it really is a wonderful, very powerful, and as Rita says, a very spiritual event to be a part of that.
And was this year any different than the previous 3 years that you've been there?
Mm-hmm. Quite different. First of all, the stadium experience on Saturday, and then on Sunday, a person had to work very hard this year to be arrested, whereas previous years, we've been able to just cross the line and they decide whether they're going to arrest us or not. This year, that fence did make a huge difference, and there were, I believe, finally over 100 people who were arrested. Much different than last year when there were many hundreds of us arrested. Other than that, I would say that the presence of the puppetry, the theatrical parts of it were more vivid and very much more present this year than other years. I think there was an energy gained in just the fact that we heard about the whole court case, and the fact that the judge gave us permission to legally do this protest. I think there was a lot of energy around that helped a great deal. And I think just probably a lot of different people, as well as many of the same people who return year after year to this. I meet friends down there, all 4 years have met friends from Minnesota there. And So I've been able to be present with them each time as well. And this year it was different in that we experienced the whole sense of the singing, the speaking, all of that part that those of us who had crossed the line in previous years missed, actually, by doing that processional. So it was a different feel this year. But I think every bit is wonderful. And I have to admit that I was quite concerned about going down. I was concerned about our safety and the kind of risk we were taking after the events of September 11th, with just the feelings of so-called patriotism in this country, and how we would be received. But it went well.
And part of the procession, my understanding, is the reading off of the names, and you mentioned each pick up a cross. And so can you describe a little bit what that process was like and kind of how long that went on for in terms of the
Hours.
reading of the names?
Hours. It's a very slow-moving.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no shortage of names of murdered people to hold. I mean, they read names, I think, probably for 4 hours, while 10,000 people slowly walk up to the gates. It just continually, there were 4 people reading or chanting people's names for probably 4 hours.
And some of the chanting is in Spanish and some in English, so that makes it very powerful as well.
And the people respond presente,
Presente,
that person
yes.
is present
Yeah.
after their name is read. Well, so in terms of following the demonstration, do we have information about what School of the Americas graduates are up to these days?
Well, one of the workshops that we went to before, on the Friday before actually, was the Columbia Mobilization Network, talking about what's going on now in Columbia, because that's the current major focus of School of the Americas graduates, or the School of Americas. Columbia has become the #1, I guess, client, if you want to use that term, of the School of Americas. There's now been more than 10,000 members of the Colombian military trained through the School of Americas. And this is being done in the name of our so-called war on drugs, but it's the militarization and destruction of Colombian civil society because of the United States' drug habit. It's absurd. But it's more than that. I mean, the Colombian military has the worst human rights record of any military in Latin America now. That seems to, as soon as you become the #1 recipient of School of the Americas graduates, you also graduate to the #1 human rights abuser of the hemisphere. And when you read of Colombia, people were telling us of what's going on in Colombia. In the name of the School of the Americas and the war on drugs, where the School of the Americas graduates and the paramilitaries are assassinating union leaders, community leaders, like Rita mentioned, the people from Colombia who came to visit us. Our friend Jesus is now in hiding because of death threats. This man is an agricultural worker. He does the same work I do, sustainable agriculture work. And he's now hiding with his family because the paramilitaries are trying to find him and kill him. And that has nothing to do with the war on drugs, and everything to do with social control and a war on poor people. And that's the current focus of the probably what's happening right now with School of the Americas graduates and that connection. We've left El Salvador and Nicaragua and are now exerting our policies of globalization on Colombia.
Well, I know Gil is...
Yes, Mexico as well, certainly. The Zapatista rebels led an uprising in 1994, at the same time NAFTA went into effect. And I saw a documentary in the fall of 2000, and I was so angry after that, after just seeing that. And I remember what really energized me to do something was hearing that Wall Street's response to the uprising and the Zapatistas was to get rid of the Zapatistas. That was their message to the Mexican government. And just seeing that, it energized me at that time to go to Mexico, actually, and accompany the rebel leaders of the Zapatista army from Chiapas up to Mexico City. And for 2 weeks, we were part of a caravan that went through Mexico and stopped at many, many cities and towns all along the way. And Subcomandante Marcos and the other leaders spoke at each place. The events were called actos, and they were extremely powerful. And the people, the turnout for these events was incredible, and it was way beyond what anyone even imagined might take place. Towns where they were expecting maybe 5,000 people to show up, 30,000 would be there, and you couldn't get through the crowds. I mean, the crowds took over the squares of all the towns and cities, and it was an amazing, amazing experience, and risky as well, but I would do it again in a heartbeat. And part of that, one weekend we were able to attend, because we were part of the caravan, the 3rd Indigenous Conference in Mexico. And that was held up in up high in the mountains in a very indigenous, totally indigenous community, and it was a beautiful experience as well. But fully support the Zapatista rebels in what they have been doing.
And my understanding is that since the Zapatista uprising in January 1st of '94, that Mexico has started sending more soldiers to the School of the Americas to be trained?
Exactly. Because of that uprising, Mexico then began to send many, many more men to be educated through the SOA as well, and to continue the repression of these people, which is ongoing right now. The Zapatista rebels last year were able to speak in Congress for the first time. It was their first time officially out of Chiapas, but now Congress passed a very watered-down indigenous bill, and they are back to where they were before with the repression back in Chiapas again.
You know, I know all of us feel that the money that's spent to train these soldiers, if it was actually spent on educating these soldiers in health and education, you know, they could go back and help their people who are so poor and so uneducated and have no access to health care. And these millions of dollars could do so much good for other people in the world, but instead, we use it to train soldiers, and that's unexcusable. It's just unexcusable.
Those who support the School of the Americas try to say that it is a place that also teaches democracy, teaches democratic values. It's very interesting that we hear time and time again about the atrocities that these people, these soldiers who return to their countries commit. I've never heard anything positive. I've never heard of the democratic values that they supposedly learn. I've never heard of how they help to spread those democratic values, ever.
And for those people that are concerned about the School of the Americas and would like to do something about that, what would you suggest that they do?
Join us next year.
Yeah, Father Roy Bourgeois did say that this year he was so pleased because not only was it the Veterans for Peace and the Women Religious and families, but there were so many youth. He said that gave him so much hope, and there were youth from Missoula and even our own children. It was very, very touching and very powerful. But there are other things other things that we can do in tandem, because the School of America Watch recommends that you take part in vigils and demonstrations and rallies and fasts, but also Janina is going to make some recommendations about the legislative things that we can do to pressure our Congress people to say that, we want something different.
Well, right now there's a bill being, there's a bill in the House of Representatives. It's actually not being voted on yet, but they're getting sponsors, and it's House Bill 1810, and it's to stop funding or close the School of Americas. Right now it's known as the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, and it'd be really important to contact our Representative Rehberg and tell him that you would appreciate if he signed on or sponsored this bill, that you do not support using your tax dollars to train Latin American soldiers, to terrorize their own people, or even the fact that there have been graduates have committed human rights violation that should not be acceptable. There's many numbers you can call, and we gave one earlier, and we're actually going to call his office in Montana today to leave a message that we want him to support the bill.
And what's the number?
The number is 1-888-232-2626.
Which is a toll-free number, right?
Yes. He probably won't be in tonight, but we'll leave a message anyways. Hello, my name is Janina Bradley, and I was calling to ask that you support the House Representative Bill 1810 to close the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. Graduates from the school are known human rights abusers, such as Rios Montt of Guatemala, and excuse me. I think the voice message is not working correctly. Well, we get the idea.
You'll call again tomorrow?
He hung up on me. But basically to tell Dennis Rehberg to please support House Bill 1810 to close the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation.
I think on January 17th, there's actually the School of America's Watch, the people who organized the Fort Benning protest, have called for a national call-in day to Congress. That's January 17th is the anniversary of changing the name of School of the Americas and trying to sanitize their way out of this issue. Everyone needs to call on January 17th or before then to let them know that name changes aren't going to get them out of it this time. So the School of America's Watch has called for that call-in day. And the School of America's Watch also has a very good website that people should look at for more information. It's www.soaw.org, and they have a lot of information and updates on what's happening at the school.
And one last thing, the vote was just 10 short last time. So it is important that we call and we get Representative Rehberg to sign on to saying close the School of Americas. So.
There are 94 co-sponsors now in the House for this bill, so this has a real chance of success if people bring enough pressure.
Again, I'd like to thank all of you very much for taking the time to go to Fort Benning and for spreading the word about what's going on with the School of the Americas. And would like to encourage all of you to take the time to make that call to Representative Rehberg and urge him to co-sponsor H.R. 1810 as well to finally close the School of the Americas. Thank you.